4K full frame, DSLRs, and one mirrorless camera. We have cameras from Canon, Nikon, and Sony, totaling like over $15,000 here. The Canon 1DX Mark II records in 4K and 60 frames a second. It's the only camera. These other two cameras only do it in 30 frames a second. It has a touchscreen, which is really nice, and it has phase detect autofocus, which will slowly pull focus, slowly and smoothly, like cinematically pull focus. That's something that the Nikon and the Sony simply can't do well. You would need a separate manual focus puller. For the top frame rate, you're going to need to record to the CFast card internally. It has one CFast card and one compact flash card, and you can record like 40K 30 frames a second to the compact flash, but for the 60 frames a second, you'll need to be using the CFast. It will output HDMI for external recording, but only at HD. So you can record at 4K, 30 or 60 frames a second, but your HDMI output is going to be HD only. Canon says it's for use in like an offline proxy, so you can't record 4K externally. The Nikon D5, on the other hand, will record 4K externally and internally. Now, when you record 4K internally, it has a 3-minute time limit. These other two cameras have 30-minute time limits, and that 3-minute internal time limit is a real big deal. In fact, it's a deal breaker for some people. Now, I can't get confirmation of it, but I feel like the problem is probably heat buildup. These are weather-sealed cameras, and it takes a lot of processing power to churn through 8 megapixels at 30 frames a second. The way the Canon does it is it only records in a special format, which is basically motion JPEG. It's the exact same JPEGs that you get when you're shooting sports or whatever, just recording them without any different formatting. So it can use that same like efficient JPEG processor, but as a result, you get huge files when you record 4K at 60 frames a second there because it doesn't have more sophisticated compression. So it's really nice that if you want to bypass that 3-minute limit, you can use an external recorder, but then you're adding, you know, at least $1,000 to it, and you have to carry around this extra box here. It would be nice. You can record internally and externally at the same time, which could give you a good backup as long as your limits are as long as you're only recording 3 minutes at a time. The D5 uses XQD cards. I think most of us are getting the XQD cards because they're just faster. They're better for sports and for the 4K recording. The Nikon also has a touchscreen that you can use to focus, but it doesn't do smooth focus pulling like the Canon does. This is the Sony A7R II. Now, the Sony A7R II is unique in that it can record full frame, the full output from the entire width of the sensor when you're recording 4K. And that's unique. That means that when you're using full frame lenses, you'll be able to take advantage of that full background blur. You'll get the focal length that you're actually expecting. These two cameras crop at 1.42x. So when you slap on a 24mm lens, you're getting more like a 34mm lens. And that's a real problem, especially if you're somebody who's switching between stills and video, because if you just want to get a video clip of whatever you're shooting, well, you're going to have to zoom back or you're going to have to change lenses or something. It's a real problem. The Sony, one of our favorite features is that we can shoot full frame, or we can switch it to Super 35 mode, which gives us a 1.5x crop factor. So if you do want to get a little length out of your lens, an extra length out of it, that's really useful, especially for things like wildlife. And in fact, when you're in 1.5x quality mode, the video quality actually goes up because it's a 1-to-1 readout. It's reading every single pixel in, so that's a better option for low light. The A7R II has a tilt screen, which is a big usability bonus when it's like on a tripod and below you. It just means you can see the screen easier, but it's not a touch screen. So you're pretty much going to end up manually focusing. But on the upside, it does have focus peaking. You can see those yellow highlights coming in to show me which part of the frame is currently in focus, but we don't really trust focus peaking. It's not that reliable. The Sony uses a single SD card, which means they're quite a bit cheaper to record to. The Sony, because it's a mirrorless camera and it has a short flange distance, you can actually adapt both Canon and Nikon lenses to it, but you'll lose what video autofocus capabilities you really have, at least in any sort of reliable way. Here at ISO 800, we never really see much of a difference. The white balance tends to be a little bit different, but that's usually pretty easy to fix in post. What you might notice though is that the Canon there is shooting at 60 frames a second. And there's two things you can do with 60 frames a second. For one, you could do what we're doing, which is render your video at 60 frames a second. And if you're publishing to YouTube or someplace that supports that, it just looks better. Just, there's not a lot of action going on now, but check this out. Everything just gets a little bit smoother. And if you don't believe me, look up 60 frames a second video on YouTube. They just look much better. Every PC gamer has figured this out. The other thing you can do with 60 frames a second is slow things down to half the frame rate. So it's not like a real striking slow motion effect, but it's a little something, and cinematically it's a nice thing to be able to do. The other thing you can do with 60 frames a second is slow things down to half the frame rate, so it's not like a real striking slow motion effect, but it's a little something. Slow motion effect. And at ISO 3200, we typically don't see a really big difference between these cameras. Wow, was that on camera? I never get a shot when I'm being filmed. ISO 12800 isn't something that we really use very often. Like, we've done some kind of moonlight videos where you need to be way up there, but generally we're at the lower ISOs, and if we do need to go to a higher ISO, we would just add light. So the only time you need to do this is for like events or people who are filming night photography videos. But still, people are interested in these higher ISOs, and some people have practical uses for them. So that's why we test it. So here we are at ISO 25600. That's the Sony's max native ISO. Canon is being pushed one stop, and the Nikon will go all the way to ISO 3 million. We've tested that before, and it's real useless. It's just like real bad, and I can't think of any scenario where you'd ever want to use it. So we're not even going to bother this time. But who is the winner today? Which is the best video camera? I can only really say it's not the Nikon, because the Nikon's a good overall camera. It's a fantastic sports camera, and I'm glad they put 4K in it. But with that 3-minute limit and the lousy video audio autofocus, I just can't pick it. I know some people think Nikon has said that they'll remove the 3-minute limit, but I checked with them and they will not confirm that, so I don't know for sure that it's coming. It's hard to pick between the Canon and the Sony because they're good for different markets. The Sony has a tilt screen, and it's small and compact, and you can pick between full frame and 1.5x crop. That's something we find really useful. As a stills camera, it's also got 42 megapixels, which is I prefer over the Canon's like 20 megapixels. But the Sony doesn't have a touchscreen. It does not have good video autofocus, and the battery life is appalling. It will regularly screw up your filming. Swapping those batteries out is a real pain. The Canon, the battery lasts forever. The video autofocus is fantastic, and it's a really durable camera, but it's big and heavy. I also really, really wish it had a touchscreen if I was going to be using it. That, and you can't film full frame, so you're always cropping into whatever your lenses are. So they're for different people, right? One last thing, battery life. The Sony here, the battery's at 16%, it's almost dead. We burned through most of the battery just filming the introduction to this video, but once you start filming, it goes through it even faster. The Canon and Nikon here still have well over half their battery life. Look at the batteries. They're both about the same size on these two cameras, but look at this thing compared to the Sony battery, and this tells you the whole story. I don't know why Sony is making serious, fantastic video cameras with teensy little batteries. You can get a battery pack, and that can help, but this is a standard battery, and it screws us up all the time because we love the camera. We film with it all the time. But we're always running out of batteries. Justin's always like, I gotta stop filming while I go swap the battery out. Big batteries definitely help. These things will get an hour and a half, 2 hours of 4K recording time. If you like this video, subscribe to see our full review and upcoming reviews, and we'll teach you photographic techniques, video techniques, and click like, share it with your friends. Thanks. Okay. The image database file, man, what the hell is up with that? No other camera in the world needs that.